Why didn't Jiraiya bring Nagato, Konan, and Yahiko back to Konoha with him? I've got a lot of respect for Jiraiya. He did indeed take care of a group of 3 orphans over the course of several years. He still couldn't hang around for Naruto though. I mean, Konoha really just dropped the ball on Naruto. But part of me simply wants to say that he didn't know about Naruto or thought that maybe he was being taken care of. I don't know, but that's not the point. The point is, Jiraiya's not above raising kids. But my question is why he didn't train them anywhere else. I understand that Amegakure was their home, and I further understand that their dreams were centered around Amegakure, to be peacekeepers and to be like Hanzo, which I'm sure made Jiraiya cringe. A lot. But what if he had just decided to bring them back to Konoha with him? Surely if he had, something might have changed, or perhaps they would have remained undeterred. After all, Nagato, Konan, and Yahiko were originally driven by what we call holy fire. Their dreams weren't just pushed forward by one's own desire, but because they were what was good, and they felt obligated to do what was good. So in the end, there is no change to the fact that they would want to bring peace. But perhaps what would change is their fall. After all, in Konoha, they would have been able to meet a bunch of people that would eventually cause a lot of change in their lives, as well as the world, and I'm interested to see how this would change things. So buckle up, Buttercup, and look upon another of the Amagi's infinite Tsukuyomi worlds. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you're subscribed, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. The rain fell as they walked. Jiraiya looked up to the clouds and back towards his 3 young charges. It had been raining ever since they left Ame, and now Konoha's gates were in clear view ahead of them. It was always said that you could take a person out of their village, but you could never take the village out of a person. Still, looking back at Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan, Jiraiya wasn't quite sure of that. After all, it seemed that the village had followed them, the intense precipitation falling, being a constant reminder of the village they had just left. As Nagato looked up into the clouds, he began to wonder if every village was like Ame. He had read books and heard stories of lands where no rain fell, lands as dry as, well, whatever was dry. It's not like Nagato had much experience of the concept of dry, but as he walked now, he felt as if that had all been a lie, the rain being as heavy and prevalent here as it had been before. Despite that, and despite how tired their feet were from walking all day, Yahiko still seemed to have a pep in his step. While he had originally been depressed to leave his village where he grew up, the last place he and his parents had ever spent time together, he was currently full of hope, believing that the future held great things for them, and that this was merely the first stepping stone to eventually helping Ame. By helping themselves in Konoha, they were helping Amegakure in the long run. They would be helping the world in the long run. And so Yahiko kept a smile on at all times. To be frank, Nagato himself had been a little nervous about this from the start. He wasn't sure he wanted to leave Ame, not that it held anything there for him. Nothing but horrible, tainted memories that all the same he couldn't bring himself to let go of. Even if the memories hurt, he couldn't just leave them behind, and by leaving, he felt as if he was abandoning everything that he loved, even if what he loved was no longer present in Ame. Konan had comforted him in this way by telling him that what he loved he would carry inside of him forever. The good times and those memories were something already in his heart, and they did not need Ame to keep those memories alive. Passing through the gates, they entered the strange foreign village. It seemed far less industrial than Ame, more rural, yet all the same, this village was one of the 5 superpowers among the shinobi world. It was astounding how such a humble-looking village could also be one of the largest and strongest in existence. Yahiko already liked this place. It felt homey. Jiraiya continued to lead them toward the heart of the village, straight toward the monument where the faces of previous Kage would be displayed. Such a sight astounded Konan, who saw this as one of the grandest works of art she had ever witnessed. Jiraiya smiled as he saw her admire the monument. The mountain bearing the visage of the Kage was the face of Konoha in the literal and figurative senses. It never got old seeing people's reaction. "What happens if you get a new Kage though?" she asked. "Simple. We carve a new face on the mountain." For most outsiders, they were worried with how they were going to carve faces out of the rock. For those in the village, the fear was that they would run out of rock with which to carve new faces. This would not happen in Jiraiya's lifetime, but that was a legitimate fear for all those in the village. They continued walking until they reached the Hokage's office. There they found a man in a long white robe, wearing a large red pointed hat. The man sported a brown goatee and possessed liner around his eyes not too far removed from Jiraiya. Despite his somewhat youthful appearance, his true age was displayed in the salt and pepper hair sprinkled throughout and the hair they could see under his hat. He saw the orphans and Jiraiya and smiled, the crow's feet around his eyes slowly contracting as to show how he got these wrinkles in the first place. "Welcome back, Jiraiya," the man said. "Orochimaru and Tsunade got back a little earlier and told me of the guests you'd be bringing." Jiraiya nodded and presented the three kids. Jiraiya had to push quite a bit to get them out there, their heels digging into the wood, trying to stop their forced movement. They were huddled together into a tight group, simply looking without saying a word. All of that excitement they'd displayed earlier had suddenly fallen to ice-cold dread. Hiruzen smiled. "A shy bunch, are they not?" Jiraiya gives a slight chuckle. "Not so much shy as they are cautious." Hiruzen would offer a slight nod. "Indeed. It's a good quality to have in a shinobi. I assume these three do indeed wish to become shinobi." Hiruzen looked at the report offered by Tsunade on the children. Jiraiya nodded. "Yeah, they do. But they don't wish to become shinobi only for the sake of any village, but as a group of peace seekers." Hiruzen looked up, his soft smile slightly fading but not entirely disappearing. "You know that Konoha generally doesn't train outsiders. But what's an outsider when we've declared the village to be anyone's village who so desires it?" Jiraiya posited. Hiruzen sat back in his seat. "It's anyone's village who so desires to serve it. But from the sounds of it, these children do not wish to serve it. That's not to say that we won't let them stay. They're our valued guests. But all the same, I do not know if we should so easily give away our secrets when they don't seem to be of the mind to actually serve in its military force." Jiraiya shook his head. "I'm not asking to show them everything in the secret folders, Lord Third. I'm simply asking for them to receive the same opportunities. They will serve the village. It's just not their dream. It's a stepping stone to their dreams." Hiruzen stroked his goatee. "If you say we should train them, then I'll approve it." Jiraiya offered him a slight bow of thanks. Jiraiya turned to lead the kids out, but was halted. "I did not say I was finished yet, Jiraiya." Jiraiya turned back. Hiruzen would continue reading the paper presented to him by Tsunade. "It says here that one of the boys possesses an unusual dojutsu." Jiraiya nodded. "Indeed." He brought Nagato a bit closer. Nagato seemed a bit nervous. Hiruzen would gently push the hair covering Nagato's face aside. "Unusual," he said, looking at them. "I've never seen anything like this. It must be rare." Jiraiya then spoke. "I've posited a theory that this could be the legendary Rinnegan." Hiruzen looked at Jiraiya and then back to Nagato. "It certainly fits the description. Highly unusual. This boy is not descended from the Uchiha though, but from the Uzumaki." Jiraiya nodded. "It's possible that he possesses Uchiha blood, even if distantly." Hiruzen nodded. "I suggest taking him to the Uchiha for a check, just to be sure." Jiraiya would nod. "Is that all?" Hiruzen sat back in his chair. "That's all. You're dismissed." As they left, Hiruzen smiled and waved to them. "Welcome to our village, children. I hope you enjoy your time here." As they left, Konan spoke. "What a nice man." From here, they made their way to Jiraiya's home to rest for a time and to get off their feet. Hiruzen would send a message to the Uchiha and ask their leadership to gather for a meeting about something important. After a few moments of rest, they would be informed that the Uchiha Council of Elders was waiting for them. And so the group would make their way to the Uchiha compound where they'd be escorted to the meeting by a few kind Uchiha. For this, Konan and Yahiko were merely there to watch. This was all about Nagato. Jiraiya was only there to provide context. They had Nagato sit before them all, and it was obvious that he was nervous, not used to the attention he was being given. As he sat there, the newest and one of the youngest clan heads of the era, Fugaku, appeared, who was no more than 23 years old. He would be surrounded by the elders of the clan, and they would begin to make inquiry. The group would ask that Nagato please display his eyes to them, to which Nagato would push the hair from his brow and display them as commanded. Seeing the eyes, there was an audible gasp in the room. A bead of sweat formed on Nagato's cheek and ran down to the bottom of his jaw before dropping off. After a close examination, they had determined that this was in fact a Rinnegan, just as the stone tablet had said. "Who is this child?" Fugaku asked. "This is Nagato Uzumaki, of the village hidden in the rain." "Uzumaki?" Fugaku asked. Jiraiya would affirm that he was. Fugaku stroked his chin. According to information provided to us by the Uchiha Stone Tablet, an artifact passed down by the Sage of Six Paths, a Rinnegan can be awakened by the union of Senju and Uchiha Chakra. Who were this boy's parents? Jiraiya stuttered a bit. Fuso, a tiny voice said. Fuso was my mother, and Issei was my father. Fugaku eased forward a bit and spoke in a calm, inviting tone. Can you tell me what their clan affiliations were? Nagato nodded. Uzumaki. My mother was descended from the Uzumaki, and my father was not from a clan that was very big, just a small family line from a clan that was destroyed in the Warring States period. Fugaku nodded and began to speak with the other members of the clan via whisper. This boy doesn't possess any Uchiha genealogy. That you know of, one of the elders spoke. The elder turned to Nagato. Do you know if either of your parents had any direct connection to the Uchiha? The elder asked. Nagato shook his head. Can you shut off your Rinnegan? Another elder interjected. What? Nagato asked. The elder repeated. Can you shut it off? The Rinnegan is a dojutsu of the same family and type as the Sharingan. You're currently in the activated state. Simply tell your eye to relax and it should shut down like a Sharingan does. Nagato sat there for a moment. I cannot shut it down. It's been active for as long as I can remember. Each of the elders looked to each other and then to Fugaku. Fugaku ordered the Uchiha optometrist to perform an exam on his eyes in front of the council. The doctor agreed. Coming to Nagato, he began examining his Rinnegan. It is authentic, the doctor said while he was checking it. It possesses a very similar internal structure to a Mangekyo Sharingan, but slightly more advanced. He continued to examine the eye, unable to hold back his excited nature at being able to investigate one of, if not the most reputed dojutsu to ever exist. Pulling back, he gave his report. The Rinnegan are indeed authentic, and they do possess the same internal structure as a Sharingan. Close examination reveals that this is more than just a Rinnegan, however. He possesses the structure for a Sharingan and Mangekyo Sharingan within, indicating that he should have both of these. How long have you had the Rinnegan? Fugaku asked. Nagato thought about it for a moment. My parents said that I've always had them, to their knowledge. Have you ever displayed a Sharingan or Mangekyo Sharingan in your life? Nagato shook his head. Fugaku looked to the optometrist and spoke. He possesses Rinnegan that he can't shut off, and the structure for a Rinnegan and Mangekyo Sharingan that he can neither activate nor mark when he gains such things. Is it possible that he possesses transplanted eyes? The doctor would turn to Nagato and place his fingers against his temples while making use of the mystic palm technique to see within his head. The doctor would then speak. I detect some scarring on the optic nerve. Does that mean they were transplanted? Or could it perhaps be from overuse? The doctor shook his head. The damage done to a Mangekyo Sharingan is specifically dealt within the eye itself, and though it does possess some scarring within, indicating the use of a Mangekyo in the past, his eye is fine. But the scarring on the optic nerve indicates that the nerve was severed and reattached. It's my expert opinion that these eyes the boy possesses are not his birth eyes, but the eyes of someone else who possessed a Sharingan. Nagato was shocked. He looked down at his hands as he slowly raised them to touch his eyes. These eyes aren't mine? Then whose are they? Nagato seemed slightly agitated, quite a bit scared. The optometrist turned to him and put a hand on his shoulder. It's okay, you're fine. Ocular transplants aren't out of the ordinary and it's done for many reasons. He does raise a valid point, however, one of the elders said in regards to Nagato. He possesses eyes that are mysterious and powerful, yet they're not the eyes he was born with. So it begs the question, if he did not awaken them, who did? Were they Rinnegan when he got them? Or were they simply transplanted into his head and became Rinnegan due to his distant connection to the Senju clan? But the biggest, most important question we must ask ourselves right now, at this very moment, is that if he should be allowed to keep them. The council began to clamor amongst itself. Nagato seemed distraught. Get to keep them? Does that mean that Jiraiya walked over and knelt down to him and embraced him. The crowd began to quiet down as they heard the sound of subtle sobbing. The council looked to see Nagato crying into Jiraiya's chest. I don't want to be blind, Nagato said. The room was silent until one of the council members looked to Fugaku. What do we do? What will we do? Fugaku looked back at the distraught boy who was now being comforted by the other children. I think he's suffered enough, Fugaku said. Let him keep the Rinnegan. Whoever gave them to him, they gave them to him for a reason. I don't think it's up to us to take those away. Let him keep them. If we do, we may never know what the stone tablet says, one of the elders said. Fugaku looked to the man. And why not? Do you assume the child does not know how to read? Well, no, the elder stumbled. Fugaku waved his hand to Nagato. Then he can read it for us. There's no harm in that. Fugaku turned back to Nagato. Do not worry, child. Nobody will take your eyes. They're yours to keep. Nagato looked back. Really? Fugaku nodded. Yes, keep them. We simply ask that you do us a favor. We want you to read the stone tablet for us. Nagato looked at Jiraiya and then back at Fugaku, agreeing to do so. And so they brought Nagato to the stone tablet at the Naka shrine and asked that he read it. From start to finish, he read it to them, making mention of the story of the Uchiha and the story of the Sage of Six Paths. He read of the battle between Hagoromo and the Ten Tails, the creation of the moon via Chibaku Tensei, and finally he told of the infinite Tsukuyomi and how it would be the salvation of the Uchiha. Fugaku was surprised at how much there was on there that he didn't know of. According to the tablet, it spoke of the power of the Ten Tails being the power of the sage himself, and how gathering them all together into one place would bestow one with the powers of the sage, and the powers of the infinite Tsukuyomi. Nagato was astounded by this as well. The Uchiha would beg Nagato to stay with them at the compound, going so far as to offer him foster parents who would love and take care of him. But this Nagato denied, stating that he wanted to stay with his friends. He wanted to be with Yahiko and Konan. Jiraiya offered to keep them close and help raise them, which they had already agreed to. The Uchiha found this sad, but all the same, they respected it. Jiraiya would later tell Hiruzen about the Uchiha's stone monument and the Uchiha's reaction to its contents, which Hiruzen found troubling. During this time, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan would be introduced to the rest of the class. They sorta kept to themselves most times, but there were two particular students that they seemed to grow rather close with, Obito Uchiha and Rin Nohara. Konan seemed to connect better to Rin than her compatriots did, but the same could be said of Yahiko and Nagato's connection to Obito. They seemed to grow rather close. Nagato was much older than Obito, being about 3 years older, Nagato 12 and Obito 9. Despite that, Obito seemed to have more of a grasp on what it was to be a shinobi, being capable of various techniques already. Despite this, Obito connected well with Nagato, due to Nagato possessing a Rinnegan, much like the Uchiha's Sharingan. Despite that, Obito had yet to actually awaken his Sharingan, so there wasn't much that he could help him with there, but he did attempt to help Nagato and Yahiko learn various jutsu. And indeed, they learned quite a bit, though Yahiko, for obvious reasons, could not keep up with Nagato, who seemed to learn a jutsu the moment he saw it for the first time. A trait that was possessed by everyone with a Sharingan, Obito had said. The kids would hang out together after school too and go out to play or eat. One day though, Nagato would seem a bit more forlorn than usual. Nagato was not generally expressive, by which I mean he didn't seem to smile much, but today he was exceptionally non-expressive. Nothing Obito, Rin, Yahiko, or Konan could do would snap him out of it. They would simply ask him what the issue was, and Nagato would respond by telling him that this day marked the anniversary of his parents' deaths. Needless to say, this put a damper on the kids' moods. Konan and Yahiko seemed a little upset about that, not just because they felt bad for Nagato, but also because they too were remembering the loss of their parents. Obito could feel the mood drop and decided to sit on the swing next to Nagato, slowly kicking his legs back and forth to get enough momentum to actually swing. You know, I don't have parents either, he said in the most nonchalant fashion possible. Yahiko and Konan looked back at him. What happened? They all seemed to say in unison. Something that felt quite awkward, though the moment passed quickly. Obito spoke. They died in the Second Shinobi World War. Nagato looked down. Sorry. Obito scoffed. Why would you be? You didn't kill him. Either way, I survived, and so will you. It sucks sometimes, but I guess you just gotta deal the hand you're dealt. I've got my grandmother to help me through this, and you have Jiraiya, so I guess we just have to be grateful for what we have. Nagato nodded. After a bit of playing, the group was on their way home. However, as they were making their way back, Nagato stopped when he looked into a crowd. Mom? He wondered. Yahiko looked back. Come on, Nagato. Nagato just stood there. Mom, he said as he couldn't believe what he had just seen. Yahiko turned around and walked a little closer. Nagato. Suddenly Nagato burst out into a dash. Nagato! Yahiko cried out. What was that about? Rin asked. I don't know. He just shouted that he saw his mom and went running. Obito sighed. Then we better go after him. Nagato ran through the crowded streets, blowing past patrons, running into others, with only a slight turn and an apology called back at the person behind him. He kept running until he saw her in the distance. Her red hair, the way she walked. It was his mom. It had to be. How? Why? He didn't care. It was her. He ran through the streets. Mom! He ran up to her. Kushina Uzumaki turned to look at Nagato. The boy suddenly pulled back as if he had just collided with an electric fence. He suddenly clammed up. It wasn't his mother. How could it have been? He had seen his mother die right in front of him. Why did he think it could have been? Kushina looked to him. "Hey, you're an Uzumaki too," she said with a smile and a slight giggle. "I didn't think many of us existed anymore." She looked down at him. "Let me guess. You saw me and thought I was your mom. Well, that's fine. I can help you if you're lost, pumpkin." Nagato turned away and didn't say anything. She smiled. "Shy, huh? I get that." Suddenly, the others caught up with them. "Nagato!" Yahiko shouted. He looked to the boy who was standing there as if he were ashamed of himself, a thick shadow pulling down his face as his hair hid the most of his expression, save a quivering lip. "Wasn't her," he said. "Well, even I could have told you that. She's been dead for 3 years. Obito walked up. "Excuse me, Miss Kushina, our friend seems to have had a brain fart." Kushina looked over. "Wait, did he just say your name was Nagato?" The boy looked back and offered a slight nod, just keeping his face hidden. Kushina began to grin. "You're one of the cuties that Jiraiya brought back. Oh, and you other two must be the rest of the trio. Nice." She then saw Obito and Rin. "Ah, and you two are here. Are you their friends now?" Rin smiled and nodded her head. This brought delight to Kushina's face. "That's wonderful. I'm glad the kids have already found some friends in you two. Everyone deserves at least one, and now they've got double that, so they're really getting ahead of things." Her gaze turned back to Nagato, whose body was displaying some form of emotion that he was attempting to suppress. Her motherly instincts kicked in. "Hey now, what's wrong?" she asked as she came to him and knelt down. "Is something the matter?" Yahiko spoke in Nagato's place. "We're sorry, ma'am. You reminded him of his mother, and for some reason his brain thought you could have been her. She looks just like her," Nagato said, fighting to not sound as emotional as he was. Kushina's heart shattered into pieces as her inner mom turned to jelly. "Must console small bean," her inner Kushina said. She pulled him in close to hug, something that caught Nagato off guard. He was shocked. "Why are you?" Kushina pulled back. "We may not be direct family, but we're from the same clan. That at least makes us distant family, and whether close or distant, family's still family." And for a moment, Nagato felt as if he was once again in his mother's arms. He hugged up against her, his emotions full on display, thick tears rolling down his cheeks. The resemblance was uncanny, perhaps a bit younger in appearance. She looked more like she could be his older sister rather than his mother, but all the same the resemblance remained, as did a family connection. It was almost as if he had found his long-lost sister, or perhaps a distant aunt. All the while, Kushina continued to hug him close and let him cry into her shoulder. Rin too was starting to cry, but hers were tears of joy as displayed by a smile on her face. Yahiko seemed a little upset by it, displaying a bit of a pout on his face and crossed arms. Kushina smiled. "Are these your friends, Nagato?" Nagato looked back. "They're my closest friends, Konan and Yahiko. We're like family." Kushina smiled. "Family of yours is family of mine." She pulled Yahiko and Konan into the embrace. "Kushina! Kushina!" a voice called. She looked back and found Minato running their way. "Hey Minato, what's up?" He stopped and looked at the scene. "Wow, I knew you liked kids, but you're resorting to kidnapping now." She puffed out her cheeks in annoyance. "Very funny, Flash. These are the kids that Jiraiya brought with him." Minato's face lit up. "Oh, you're the Ame Orphans." The mood immediately changed as Minato realized he slips up. "I mean, the Ame... children's?" He shook his head. "Hey, Obito, Rin, what's up?" "We're just hanging out with our friends." Minato was surprised. "Oh, you're friends with these kids? Well, isn't it a small world? Jiraiya was my sensei." "Oh, you were Jiraiya's student?" Yahiko asked. "I think he told us about you once. Weren't you the super strong, super smart, but also super dumb shinobi who always had no jutsu, but named them too hard for everyone, including yourself, to remember?" Minato blinked a couple times. I liked that sentence better when it started as a compliment. "Yes, I am Minato Namikaze, the student of Jiraiya and soon-to-be mentor of Obito and Rin." He pointed to Obito and Rin and smiled. "I see you've already met my girlfriend, Kushina Uzumaki." Nagato continued to hug into Kushina. Minato couldn't help but feel slightly jealous. "I guess it really is a small world. So many connections between us all. Would you like to have some tea with us? Jiraiya should be on his way not too long from now. Why don't all of us meet up at our place?" The kids didn't seem to have much of an issue with this. Kushina would stand and turn around. "I was just on my way home with groceries. I can throw on a pot if you want." Minato would offer to take her bags, which she would agree to. As they began to walk off, Team Minato, or what would soon be Team Minato, would follow their master, as Yahiko and Konan weren't far behind. Beside Kushina was Nagato, whose hand she held the entire time, making small talk with him. This could only bring a smile to Minato's face as he remembered why he fell in love with her in the first place. Returning to their place, they put on the pot and continued to talk until Jiraiya came. Jiraiya would be surprised to see so many people gathered. Together they would have tea and chill for a bit, talking about matters related to the Uchiha Stone Tablet and what would be the end of the war. But as you know, peace doesn't last. As a few years of quiet went by, 2 to be exact, another war was seen on the horizon, a continuation of the hostilities from the former. By this time, Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan were 14, and they had also not only graduated from the academy, but had become Chunin, and continued as the team Jiraiya had chosen. All the while, Team Minato had found their replacement, a boy named Kakashi Hatake, who, despite his incredible skill, was actually quite a stickler, which led to him being ejected from many teams for bringing them down. But Minato hoped to fix that. The Third Shinobi World War kicked off the same as it always had, and initially Yahiko was hesitant to get involved, claiming that it was against his beliefs to kill anyone, and to that end he carried a katana with a blunted tip. Jiraiya never did stop him from doing this, knowing that he shouldn't really be there. But because they were in the village of proper age and counted among Konoha's shinobi, they had to join the war. None of the missions they got really seemed to fit them, save sabotage missions, where they weren't forced to kill, but instead they destroyed infrastructure to keep others from being able to fight. This was more up their alley, so imagine how excited they must have been when they were assigned to the Kanabi Bridge mission alongside Team Minato. The overgrowth of the trees covered them all with shadow. Minato would hold up a hand to stop them all. Jiraiya was also here, but a mission did best when it had only one chief commanding officer, so Jiraiya relinquished his title to Minato, whose mission this technically was. He was excited to see how his student handled the situation. All the added pressure really did get to Minato, who was afraid that somehow he would screw up this most important mission for the Leaf. He would turn around and look at the group of 6 adolescents. Well, 3 adolescents and 3 post-pubescents. The mission is simple. We move toward Kanabi Bridge. When we get there, we're to take C4 and place it under the struts and the weakest places. If calculations are correct, and they should be, the damage we deal will cause the bridge to collapse under its own weight. Me and my team will be the ones placing the C4, while Jiraiya and his team will be on lookout. That way we can... Suddenly, a carrier pigeon reached Minato. He was surprised. He took the paper from around its talon and began to read it. SOS. Surrounded. Survival chances nil. Please save us. After that, it gave a few coordinates on a map. Uh-oh, Minato said. Jiraiya peeked over the side to look at the paper as the 6 children all looked on with anticipation. Minato lowered the paper and looked at the group. Change of plans. I need to go. There's a squad in trouble, surrounded by Iwanin. You can't do it all by yourself, Yahiko said. You need to bring reinforcements. Minato smiled. No, I'll be fine. You guys listen to No, Yahiko's right. You need backup, Minato. You're not a one-man army. Well, Jiraiya, I'm perfectly capable of doing this Nonsense. I'm coming too. Besides, Kakashi just got promoted to Jonin, so maybe it's best to allow him to take point on this. Minato thought about it for a second. He weighed it in the balance. You know what? Why not? He looked to Kakashi. All right, Kakashi, you know the plan. It remains the same as it was before. Get to the bridge, place the C4 on the designated struts, and then pull out. Remember that all timers are linked, so don't set the time on any of them until you've placed the last one. Once you place the last one, get the heck out of there. Kakashi nodded. Minato stood and looked at Jiraiya. Should we go? Jiraiya nodded. And so the 2 of them left. Kakashi watched them go. All right, I'm in charge now. Follow my orders and you may make it home alive. Both Team Jiraiya and the other members of Team Minato looked at each other awkwardly for a moment, giving a slight eye roll before nodding. Kakashi turned around and began to lead them off. They started their long trek to the village, eventually entering Iwa territory. Nagato and the others were faithfully following Kakashi's orders, but the truth was it was slightly degrading to be ordered around by someone 2 years your junior, especially one as prideful as Kakashi Hatake. Not to diminish what he had accomplished, it was indeed a feat for a genin to become a chunin at age 6 and to become a jonin by age 12. Most children hadn't even become genin by that time, but Kakashi was a totally different beast. He was intelligent and he followed the book to a T. He didn't forget a single jot or title. He remembered everything and could be trusted with the position Konoha felt. But it was no secret that none of the shinobi present actually trusted Kakashi to lead them. It was like asking a robot to lead, an AI. Any non-sentient machine could follow orders given to them and mindlessly repeat the same phrases until they lost meaning. But only the wise and experienced knew when to apply it or when to ignore the guides. Intelligence was to know many things, but wisdom was to apply those things to the everyday in ways that optimized the situation. To most shinobi, the book that Kakashi so vehemently followed to the letter was a guideline as opposed to actual rules. After all, there was no way that a book like that one could prepare for every occasion. Everyone knew their duties as shinobi, but Kakashi took that book that was supposed to help them get an idea of what it was like to be a shinobi and turned it into the cornerstone of his style. It's not like Yahiko and the others could blame him. After all, Kakashi's father, the great Sakumo Hatake, reputed as one of the best shinobi of his generation and a possible candidate for Hokage, had failed miserably because of a decision that went against the shinobi codebook. That had led to the man's decision to commit harakiri to reclaim his honor. That sight and the experience of having lost his father had deeply scarred Kakashi, and even if he refused to admit it, he still couldn't get over it. His entire style as a shinobi was based solely around his need to follow the book that his father so often bucked, so he did not end up like his father. This was a sad thing indeed, but Kakashi wouldn't let it stop him from using that book as a crutch to cover his fears and doubts. And it was for that reason that Kakashi's leadership values were questioned. For days they trekked through the wilderness until they reached a certain river. Looking at the map, they realized that this river signified that they were close. This river fed into another river, which was the one the Kanami Bridge passed over. They were so close. The team all had their C4 ready in their backpacks. Honestly, as Nagato toted it around, he had a slight sense of dread. Even if it was illogical, he worried that he might cause the contents of the bag to shift and accidentally activate a time and cause them all to blow up. He felt as if he were certain that at any moment they would all die in a fiery explosion so loud that it could burst their eardrums if they weren't already being pulled apart by the concussive blast and shrapnel. It was due to this paranoia that Nagato didn't see Yahiko stop in front of him. He walked into Yahiko and bounced back, much to Yahiko's annoyance. "Watch where you're going, Nagato." Nagato apologized and looked around to see that they were all stopped. What's going on? Suddenly, two shinobi appeared. Mahiru, Kako, and Taiseki, 3 Iwanin. However, they didn't currently see Taiseki as he was hidden behind them, cloaked and translucent. He was trying to get the drop on the others, his eyes on Konan and Rin, planning to take one, if not both, hostage. He hoped for Rin as she seemed younger, but they would take whoever they could get their hands on. Young or old, all children broke the same. And for that reason, they believed that even if they took one of the boys, they should be able to get what they needed. Right now, they were planning to choose based on what would be easiest, but in the end, it did not matter. As he drew closer though, he stepped into the water, which caused Nagato to turn around. After all, Nagato could sense anything within water. It was a technique he had learned and developed to show his love for his original home village. Turning back around, he saw nothing, despite sensing everything. He was ready to turn back when he caught something out of the corner of his eye. He looked back again and began to focus with his Rinnegan. That was when he saw it. Taiseki. Even though the latter was invisible, Nagato could see him if he concentrated with his Rinnegan. The Rinnegan's observation was capable of seeing things even in other dimensions, so a translucent shinobi was nothing. Nagato tugged on Yahiko's arm. "Yahiko, there's one behind us." Yahiko looked back. "What? Where?" Nagato kicked water up into the air, which splashed against the figure, clearly drawing out an outline. "You can sense him with the water," Nagato said. Yahiko saw him and turned to defend against him. Kakashi and Obito looked back for only a moment and then looked at the other two. Without a moment's hesitation, Kakashi unleashed a barrage of kunai and shuriken in their direction. The shinobi would jump out of the way and the group of 9 shinobi began to fight. Despite everything, these 3 were stronger. They had more field experience and their physical strength and size outweighed that of even Kakashi. This led to the 2 teams sticking together by groups of 2 to face one enemy at a time. And even still, it was harder to do. Nagato was timid and he wasn't very strong, only just now being considered barely Chunin level. In fact, his position as a Chunin would have possibly been out of necessity. Yahiko clashed blades with Taiseki, utilizing his blunted katana, something Taiseki laughed at. "Why do you use such a pathetic weapon? Are you scared to actually kill? You handicap your potential with fear, and that's why you'll lose." Taiseki would then begin to push them all back. Rin and Konan would face off against Kako. Konan would attempt to use her paper to weaken Kako, but with his wrist blade, he would carve the paper clean out of the air. Meanwhile, Obito and Kakashi were facing Mahiru. Mahiru possessed a sword, so his blade could defend against Kakashi's white light blade. Obito and Kakashi, by reason of Kakashi, were doing better than the other groups, but still, he couldn't quite gain purchase over his enemy, especially when his focus was divided between protecting himself and the others. On a few occasions, Kako got the better of Rin and Konan, only to be pushed back by a sudden toss of a shuriken which Kako would have to avoid. Kakashi pushed out back toward the center mass of their 6-man team. As he stood there looking around, he was disgusted by the fact that he couldn't handle these 3. He looked back. "I have an idea, but you need to follow it to the letter," he said to them. Slowly, Mahiru, Kako, and Taiseki grew closer. As soon as this happened, Kakashi would give them the signal. All 5 members of the team would jump from the water to the bank of the river in either direction. Kakashi would be the only member to remain still, surrounded by the 3 Iwanin. They chortled and mocked him, asking if he was planning to be a sacrificial lamb so his friends could live. But Kakashi would disagree, saying that he needed them all out of the way to kill them. Suddenly, he formed a single powerful Chidori. At one point, Kakashi had attempted this in the presence of Minato, but he was told to never use it again due to the tunnel vision that the attack had that could get him killed. But Kakashi felt it was okay to use it now since he wasn't planning on moving anywhere. Instead of charging, he simply drove his hand into the water, causing the lightning-style chakra to radiate outwards. This would travel through the water like a conductor before traveling up the legs of the Iwanin. They cried out as they were electrocuted. Kakashi poured as much power into it as possible to kill them. Once he was finished, he pulled his hand back and watched as they fell down into the river. Kakashi was weakened by this experience, but he made it to the other end of the riverbank. They would take some time to rest due to Kakashi's exertion, but not long. They would then continue on their way to the bridge, where they would begin crawling under it to start sabotaging. Due to Nagato's Rinnegan, he was left up top to keep an eye out along with Rin and Konan, since those two seemed to be the most observant of the group, save Kakashi himself. Under the bridge, they would begin setting the C4 on the designated struts. Once all were placed, Kakashi would begin the timer. "We're live. 5-minute countdown. Get onto the bridge and run back to the others." They moved double time and climbed back onto the top of the bridge, where they rushed back to the group. "Run!" Yahiko demanded as he pointed toward the forest they had originally come from. They ran for a while and then stopped on a hill overlooking the bridge. Nagato had his fingers placed firmly in his ears in preparation for the loud explosion. As soon as it went off, Nagato screamed in terror. He felt the sound of the blast reverberating through all of his soft tissue, and essentially heard the blast of the explosion with his entire body. After the explosion, they saw the bridge collapsing out from under itself, causing the whole thing to fall. Their mission was accomplished. Together, the 6 members of the team began to make their way back to the place where they had left off from to meet up with Minato and Jiraiya again. Once they reached their destination, they told Jiraiya and Minato that the mission was a success. Together, the group went home. They returned to the village where they'd be debriefed. The 3rd Hokage informed them that with the destruction of this bridge, there was a good chance they could knock Iwa out of the war, leaving only Kumo and Kirigakure. They would be allowed to rest. However, despite Team Jiraiya being allowed to rest, Jiraiya himself was not. He and Minato would once more head out to the front lines as a dire crisis on Kumo's front had demanded it. Despite this, the Ame Orphans were allowed to finally rest. The first thing they did was have a hot bath, and after that a hot meal, 2 things they needed desperately. Once that was done, they decided to take the rest of the day off and headed to bed early. It was only about 5 p.m., but they hit the bed and conked out almost immediately. They slept through the whole night and didn't wake up until about 30 minutes to noon. And they only woke up when they heard a phone call. He picked it up and answered it with a yawn. "Toad residence." He sat there silently for a moment. Thereafter, he sat up straight in bed, eyes wide. This caught the attention of Nagato and Konan, who looked at him. Nagato opened one eye to look, and Konan sat up in bed completely. Yahiko was nodding slowly, his eyes showing concern. No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. We'll be over in a flash." Yahiko hung up the phone and stumbled out of bed to get his street clothes on. "We gotta get to Konoha General." "Why?" Konan asked. "It was Rin. She said that Obito found his grandmother yesterday when he got home. She had apparently slipped and fallen during the time he was out and broke her hip." "Oh no, that's horrible," Konan said. "We need to get there ASAP." From there, they made their way toward the hospital. Once they got there, they found Obito sitting in a chair, his head hung low. Rin sat by his side. Kakashi was nowhere to be found. Yahiko walked up to them. "What happened? How is she?" Rin looked up, answering for Obito. "She was malnourished and severely dehydrated. It seems she'd been laying on the ground for days." Obito was looking down. "If only I'd been there." "It's not your fault," Konan assured him. "There's nothing you could have done." It was then that a doctor walked into the room. "Obito Uchiha?" Obito stood up. "Yes? Is my grandmother going to be okay?" The doctor stood there. "This is always the hardest part of my job." Obito shook his head. "No, don't tell me." At approximately 12:32 p.m., she passed away. "I'm sorry, son. We tried our best." Obito's eyes began to overflow with tears as he fell to his knees. Rin and Konan walked over and knelt beside him, offering hugs and all manner of comfort. Yahiko punched the wall. Nagato merely stood there watching it all unfold. Sometimes it seems like that's all he was, passive observer. He watched his own parents get murdered by Leaf Shinobi, and then he couldn't even help fight the Iwanin. He could only see them and rely upon Kakashi. Now he was watching another scene he couldn't affect. A good friend of his had experienced a death in the family and there was nothing he could do. It was said that those with Rinnegan were gods. that they had the ability to change the world by creating a new era of peace or to destroy it with their incredible power. It was said that those with the Rinnegan had the power to preside over life and death, but right now, all Nagato was a passive observer, and he lamented that. It didn't take many days for them to have the funeral. It was short and sweet, and the only people to show up were Obito, Rin, and the Ame Orphans. Obito's grandmother was alone. She had nobody. Everyone her age had already passed away, and her only child had been killed during the Second Shinobi World War, along with her daughter-in-law. Obito was the only person she had, and so he and only his closest friends were there. After the funeral, they all returned with Obito to his house. He sat on a chair and began to reminisce about old times. There were a few smiles and a few tears, too. "You know, my grandmother once said that I was a gift from heaven," Obito said. "She said that God made me specifically to keep her company when her husband and child died." Tears began to roll down his cheeks. "But who did God make for me to replace my grandma now that she's gone?" Yahiko hugged Obito as the boy dropped the picture frame he was looking at onto the ground. Nagato picked up the picture frame and looked at it. It was a picture of Obito's grandmother holding him as a baby with two people standing nearby, what Nagato was sure had to be Obito's parents. Suddenly, Nagato's heart dropped and he once more dropped the picture frame. This time, the glass cracked as it hit the ground. Obito and Yahiko looked at him. "What's wrong?" Yahiko asked. Nagato looked at him. "Yahiko, can we talk privately for a second?" Yahiko obliged. He stood and walked to a corner where he and Nagato began to talk. "What is it, Nagato?" That couple. Obito's parents. What about them?" Nagato then continued. "I'll never forget those faces. They're the ones that killed my parents." Yahiko's eyes widened. He pointed back to the picture. "Are you sure?" Nagato nodded vigorously. "I'll never forget them. They killed my parents and then I killed them." "You couldn't have known," Yahiko said. "There was no way for you to know. You were acting out of self-defense." "Doesn't matter, Yahiko. If it weren't for me, his parents would still be here with him, and his grandmother might not have died." "You don't know that for certain," Yahiko said. "No, I do. I killed Obito's parents, and because of that, his grandmother is dead too." "What?" a third voice said from behind. They looked back to see Obito standing there. "Did you just say that you killed my parents? You're the one in Amegakure that killed them?" Obito thinks about it. "No, it makes sense. I was told that they died in an Uzumaki household." He looked back. "You killed them." Yahiko held out his hand. "Just calm down, Obito. You're emotionally compromised. You know we can explain." Obito shook his head. "If you hadn't have killed them, I wouldn't be alone right now. My grandma wouldn't have died. I'd still have a family." Nagato felt his heart breaking. He knew it was true. "I didn't..." "You didn't what? Mean to kill them? It doesn't matter because you did." Nagato looked into Obito's eyes and swore he saw a glint of red. "You're the reason this is happening to me. You're the reason..." Obito suddenly turned and burst out the door. "Obito, wait!" Yahiko cried out. But as they chased after him, Obito seemed to disappear. "Where did he go?" Yahiko asked. Konan ran out the door. "What's going on?" Yahiko and Nagato looked at her and then to each other. Something painful. Obito just needed to get away. He needed to hide. He had teleported outside the village to think. As he sat on a stone crying, he felt as if his heart had been crushed, and by a friend no less. It was then that a shadowy figure appeared nearby. Why so glum? Obito was at first startled by him. "Don't be afraid. I'm a friend." "I've heard that before," Obito said. "Sounds like an interesting story. Care to tell it?" Obito began to explain the story to him. The creature nodded. "I see. Sounds horrible. But what if I told you it didn't need to be like that? What if I told you that you could have everything you could ever wish for?" Obito blinked a few times. "I'm listening." After this happened, nobody ever saw Obito again. Rumors circulated that he had left the village and become a rogue shinobi, and when Kakashi eventually made it into the Anbu, he was surprised to find Obito's name in the bingo book under the dead or alive section. I mean, it wasn't that they specifically needed him dead, they just needed him back, because he had various jutsu that he couldn't share with others, elsewise it would become a national security risk for Konoha. As time continued to move on, Kakashi and Rin never gave up on finding Obito, and they often took missions together in hopes of reuniting with their lost friend. Nagato never truly got over the situation. He himself was hurt because of the death of his parents, and knowing that Obito was the son of the ones who killed his parents. But he also knew that he had gotten his revenge. But in doing so, he had robbed Obito of his family. It never quite sat right with him what happened. And as Rin and Kakashi continued to search for Obito, the unimaginable happened. Kakashi would return to Konoha alone, in a daze, and would be debriefed. He would say that Kirinin took hold of Rin, and sealed within her the Three Tails, Isobu, planning to use her as a weapon to destroy Konoha. But in an effort to save the village, she sacrificed herself by jumping upon Kakashi's blade. Because of that, she saved the village, but died in the process. Kakashi was never the same after that. Not long thereafter, the war was brought to an end, and Hiruzen was forced to retire due to negative reception from the village. Minato would be placed as the 4th Hokage, and things began to cool down. Nagato was sitting in the Namikaze family residence. He sat there and sighed. "Is something the matter, Nagato?" Kushina asked. Nagato nodded. "I've just been thinking about Obito recently. With the death of Rin, I just can't help but think about it." "It wasn't your fault," Kushina said. "It was war, and in war, people die." Nagato looked up at her. "It was Obito's family. Obito was my friend, and I killed his parents." Kushina rested her head on her hands, facing him. "You know, villages don't always have to be enemies. Oftentimes, after wars, they even become allies. Even though they killed each other a few years back, they managed to forge a bond of friendship and cooperation." Nagato nodded. "I just miss him," Kushina answered. "I understand." She sat back down again and thought about it. Obito's reaction isn't completely out of character for his people. You remember the Warring States period? There, we were all enemies. It might as well have been a Shinobi World War Zero. Do you know what it was about? Nagato shook his head. Kushina shrugged. Nobody does. It took place between the Senju and the Uchiha, or they were the true central players in the war. The Uzumaki, a distant relative of the Senju, fought alongside them against the Uchiha. And it seemed that the war was being driven forward by pure hatred and loss, tit for tat, and the need to get back at someone. The Uchiha haven't changed much. They're a powerful clan with powerful warriors who do magnificent things, but they also have hearts of glass. Easy to hurt, easy to crack, easy to shatter. And when they're hurt, they fight back in horrendous ways. Love and hate for them is all the same thing. As strongly as they love, as pure as their hearts, they fall so easily to darkness. And when they fall, it's devastating, and it completely changes them. Nagato nods. I didn't want to hurt him. Kushina nods. It was unfortunate what happened, but his parents were trying to kill your parents in self-defense too. It wasn't on purpose, it was just an unfortunate turn of events that only happened because circumstances forced it. It's okay. The kettle began to whistle. Kushina stood and began to stumble her way over there. She was pregnant, in the final weeks of it too, by what it seemed. Let me do that, Auntie Ku, Nagato said as he stood. Nah, you just sit down. I need to get some movement in. Maybe it'll finally jar Naruto loose. She grabbed the kettle and brought it back. She began to pour it into their cups, making them each some tea. You know you're a very special part of my family, right, Nagato? He nodded. Kushina smiled. I want you to be there with me when I give birth to Naruto. Nagato was stunned. What? Why? Kushina smiled. Because I want you to stop focusing on death all the time. I want you to see new life. I don't know if I'm ready to watch that sort of thing. Kushina laughed at him a bit. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you deliver the baby. I'm merely going to let you be one of the first people to meet your cousin, your family. You deserve to be there. You can stand outside until he's born if you want. Nagato nodded. That's good. I don't really want to see that happen. And so time continued to pass until Kushina's delivery date arrived. Nagato was brought to the secret facility. He waited outside the room as they began to give birth. As he waited in the darkness, he thought he sensed a pair of eyes watching. He looked around and thought he saw a pair of yellow eyes, but he didn't know for certain if it were real. Suddenly, he heard a couple crashes. He turned around. Aunt Kushina! He ran into the room to see a masked man holding the baby hostage. In one quick moment, Minato rushed to take the baby and the masked man rushed Kushina. Nagato rushed towards to stop him, but failed to get there in time. Both Naruto and Minato, as well as the masked man and Kushina, were gone. An explosion caught his eye as he witnessed the blanket that had swallowed Naruto go up. He stood there, wondering what was going on when suddenly he felt something sneak up from behind him. A hand reached out for his face, attempting to take his Rinnegan. It was the same pair of amber eyes that he thought he had seen before. The creature appeared to be made totally of darkness. Nagato grabbed its hands and threw it to the side. Once more it lunged at him, attempting to steal his eyes, but he weaved hand signs to perform fire-style jutsu. He blew flames, destroying the creature. What was going on? It was then that he heard a thud and a roar. He ran out to the top and saw the Nine Tails standing there. If the Nine Tails was out, he knew what that meant. It meant that Kushina was likely dead. In anger, he roared at the beast. It saw him and attempted to grip him, but suddenly, with a puff of smoke, a hand gripped the Ninetales. Nagato looked back and witnessed for the first time the Ghetto statue. It was heeding his commands. Had he truly summoned this thing? He climbed atop. With this, he could push back the Ninetales. He began to do so. He then summoned a group of large animals with the animal path to aid him in a battle against the beast. As he stood there on the Ghetto statue, he looked deep into the eyes of the Ninetales and noticed the Sharingan within. This likely meant that it was under the control of someone's genjutsu. He planned to use the Rinnegan to break this genjutsu and then place a new one that would give him complete control. It was then that he was met by the masked man who appeared on the Ninetales' snout and pushed back the attempts to take away the genjutsu. "What have you done with Lady Kushina?" Nagato demanded to know. "I removed the Ninetales from her, or do your heavenly eyes no longer see the truth?" With an angered roar, Nagato rushed at the masked man to attack him. He passed clean through. Nagato attempted to turn back and try again, but he once more passed through the man's body. The man wrapped a chain around Nagato's neck and kicked him from the side of the Ninetales' snout. Nagato fell and began to choke. His neck hurt, and he was certain that he had whiplash. He needed to move quickly. He had the drill-beaked bird fly under him, and he broke the chains around his neck. He fell onto its back as it took flight. He flew up high into the sky as Nagato began to reformulate a plan. This guy had the ability to turn intangible. That was an issue. It was an absolute defense, but it had to have a weakness, and Nagato would find it. Nagato once again jumped down and attempted to punch the man, only for his fist to go straight through his head. Nagato was surprised. Suddenly, the man pulled out a kunai and stabbed Nagato in the stomach. He stumbled back, and the masked man kicked Nagato from the Ninetales down to the ground. But then he would see a flash of light, and suddenly he was on the ground. He looked up to see Minato. "Are you okay, Nagato?" Nagato nodded. "But forget about me. What about Kushina? Is she okay?" Minato didn't answer. He simply said, "Let's save these questions for later." He would stand back up and look at the Ninetales. Nagato sat up. "He's not your average shinobi. He can turn intangible selectively. Some parts of him are intangible, others aren't. And he can decide how this works." Minato grunted. "So how do we fight that?" Nagato then began to explain. "I figured it out the last time I struck at him. It's dimensional shifting. He has the ability to teleport to another dimension, which is the reason why we can see but not touch him." "Well, that's all well and good, but it doesn't help us defeat him, does it?" Nagato held up a hand. "It can. It means he's using space-time ninjutsu to defend himself, so that must mean that he's weak to space-time ninjutsu. I think if we get him to use it a bit more, I can lock onto it and nullify it with my Rinnegan's own space-time ninjutsu." Minato nodded. "I'll take point then. You keep an eye on him." Minato would then use his flying Raijin jutsu to get Nagato back to the top of the statue. Minato would then jump to the other side and attempt to fight the masked man. From this vantage point, Nagato could see everything. Every time Minato struck out at the masked man, Nagato came closer to pinning down his dimensional location. He watched a bit longer. "There, I found it." He would then jump to the other side with his kunai and stab the masked man in the back. This took the masked man by surprise, who was then stabbed in the chest by Minato. Taking his kunai out, Nagato would then kick the man from the head of the Ninetales. He would quickly cast a new genjutsu over the beast. "Minato, hurry! If you put it back into Kushina, you might save her." Minato would then use the flying Raijin to teleport Kushina to his location. Nagato would land near the masked man, who was just laying there. Nagato would walk up to him. The masked man was still alive. He groaned a bit as he reached for his mask. He pulled it off and surprised Nagato. "Obito!" Obito sat there silently for a moment. He then looked at Nagato. Nagato rushed over and helped him up. "Obito, why did you do this?" Obito looked down at his wounds and sighed. "I just wanted back what I lost." Nagato tried to understand. You mean your parents? I'm sorry, I didn't know it was your parents. I swear, I didn't mean to kill them." Obito scoffed a bit of a laugh. I understand, Nagato. That's not why I came here. I knew for a while that you weren't responsible. I was ready to come back home, but then Rin." Obito began to cry a bit. "She died trying to find me. I knew that it was my fault. She died because I ran away. The same as my grandmother. She wanted me to be a carpenter, but I ran away from my loneliness and became a shinobi, and because of that, she died. It was never your fault, Nagato. I always knew that too. It was my fault." Nagato shook his head. "No, it's not." Obito nodded. "It is. I couldn't live with it. That was when I met a man who said that he could save the world. That was when he told me about the infinite Tsukuyomi and how it would be able to save the Uchiha clan," Nagato said. Obito nodded. "You read the tablet. With it, I could have made a world of dreams. A world where nobody dies, where nobody goes to war. A better world, but I failed. It didn't need to be this way, Obito. Obito nodded. It didn't, but that's how it is. None of that matters now. I just hope that I didn't kill Kushina. Nagato listened to him. Obito looked up. I'm probably going to hell, but I really wish I could see Rin one last time. I had so many things that I wanted to say. Obito passed away. In the end, due to Nagato's quick actions and the quick restoring of the Nine Tails to Kushina, she managed to survive, and the village suffered very little damage. Nobody died in the attack, and Nagato was hailed as a hero. With the culprit already dead, the Uchiha were never blamed, and there were never talks of an uprising, which meant that Konoha wasn't forced to destroy the Uchiha. Minato remained Hokage and led the world into a state of balance. He would raise Naruto alongside Kushina. Jiraiya would once more go back to writing, and Nagato, Yahiko, and Konan would form a new organization known as the Akatsuki. They would focus on humanitarian efforts, and would travel from village to village, aiding and rebuilding after the war. Peace was not something you achieved and could hold on to. It was a daily responsibility and should never be taken for granted. These causal nexuses that the Uchiha feared so much actually added contrast. One could not know love without knowing hate. One could not know victory without loss, and one could not know peace unless they suffered war. It was this threat, and the hearts striving to fend it off, that made maintaining peace worthwhile. Every day, Nagato led them closer to peace, and aided as many as he could, winning over the hearts and minds of many. Slowly, the small humanitarian group formed into a real movement, something that swept over the world, and threatened to end war as a business entirely. Together, Nagato redefined what it meant to be a shinobi, and showed that through love and connection with the hearts and minds of others, it was possible to bring balance and peace to the world. Nagato loved his people. He loved Ame, and he loved Konoha, and it was because of this love that he fought so vigorously for peace, an effort that was not wasted. And I suppose I can call it quits here. This is the end of this video series. I know you probably wanted a bit more, and if you do, maybe I can oblige, but only if you start clicking that like button and sharing it with your friends. If you have any other ideas, be sure to leave them down in the comments and tell us more about them. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when we drop more content like this, and if you can't wait for the next video, consider watching one of these other two on the screen. Anyway, until next time, peace.